Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, her weathered hands gripping the command rail as she studied the holographic display before her. The emergency signal had been broadcasting for 3 standard hours now, its alien origin unmistakable, yet its message crystal clear in any language. Help us. Signal analysis complete, Captain, reported Lieutenant Torres from the communications station. Source is approximately 47 light minutes away, near the Kepler system's outer rim. The transmission pattern matches Ethereal Republic protocols. Sarah raised an eyebrow. The Ethereal Republic was one of the newer additions to the Galactic Council, a species of graceful, luminescent beings who resembled living crystals more than flesh and blood. They were peaceful by nature, their entire civilization built around harmony and non-violence. What could possibly threaten them enough to broadcast an emergency signal into the void? "Any word from command?" Sarah asked, turning to her XO, Commander Marcus Webb. "Negative, Captain. We're the closest vessel to the signal's origin. The next nearest council ship is 6 days away at maximum burn." Marcus paused, studying his tablet. "Command's initial response is to wait for backup. Standard protocol for first contact emergencies." Sarah nodded slowly, but her jaw tightened. Standard protocol. Always the safe choice, always the cautious approach. It was the kind of thinking that had kept humanity on the sidelines of galactic politics for decades after their admission to the Council. Too aggressive, they said, too violent. Too willing to resort to force when diplomacy might suffice. "Captain," Torres called out, his voice urgent, "I'm picking up additional signals now. Multiple ships closing on the ethereal position. Energy signatures are unusual." The main screen shifted to display the tactical overview. Sarah's blood ran cold as she saw the formation approaching the small ethereal colony ship. 7 vessels, each one massive and angular, their hulls gleaming with an oily black sheen that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. She'd seen ships like these in intelligence briefings, though never in person. "Void Reapers," Marcus whispered, his face pale. "What the hell are they doing this far into Council space?" The Void Reapers were the nightmare that haunted the Outer Rim territories, a nomadic species of raiders and slavers. They appeared without warning, stripped entire worlds of their resources and populations, then vanished back into the dark between stars. The Council had been fighting a losing war against them for over a century, their peaceful methods proving woefully inadequate against an enemy that viewed mercy as weakness. "Signal's changing, Captain," Torres reported. "It's becoming more desperate. They're pleading for immediate assistance. The Reapers are powering weapons." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, weighing her options. The Defiance was a heavy cruiser, one of humanity's newest designs. Her crew of 800 was well-trained and experienced, veterans of the border conflicts that had raged before humanity's acceptance into the Council. But 7 Reaper ships? Even for a Deathworlder crew, those odds were brutal. Communications. "Open a channel to the fleet," Sarah commanded. "Fleet?" Marcus looked confused. "The human vessels currently on patrol in this sector. I know they're out there." Sarah's smile was predatory. "We might be the closest council ship, but we're not the only human ship in the area." Torres worked frantically at his console. "Broadcasting on all human frequencies, Captain. I've got responses coming in now. The destroyer UES Retribution is 12 minutes out. The frigates Morning Star and Iron Will are 18 minutes behind them, and—" His eyes widened. "Captain, the battleship UES Vengeance is 22 minutes away." Marcus let out a low whistle. The Vengeance was Admiral Patricia Kane's flagship, a massive dreadnought that carried enough firepower to level a small moon. If she was in the area, it meant this region was considered strategically important to human interests. "Patch me through to Admiral Kane," Sarah ordered. The main screen flickered, then resolved into the stern face of Admiral Patricia Kane. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her pale blue eyes held the kind of cold intensity that came from decades of warfare. Behind her, the Vengeance's bridge bustled with activity. "Captain Chen," Kane said without preamble, "I assume you're calling about the ethereal distress signal?" "Yes, ma'am. The situation has deteriorated. 7 Void Reaper vessels are closing on their position. They'll reach the colony ship in approximately 20 minutes. Kane's expression didn't change, but Sarah caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "And your assessment of the tactical situation?" "Grim, Admiral. The Ethereals have no military capability. Their ship is a civilian transport carrying approximately 3,000 souls, mostly families and children. The Reapers will either enslave them or worse. Council response? 6 days minimum. We're on our own." Kane was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant as she considered the implications. Sarah knew what she was thinking. Engaging the Reapers without Council authorization would mean violating a dozen treaties and protocols. The political fallout would be severe, but allowing 3,000 innocent beings to die or be enslaved would be something far worse. "Admiral," Sarah said quietly, "those are children on that ship." Kane's jaw tightened. "I'm aware of that, Captain." She paused, then straightened in her chair. "All human vessels in the sector are hereby authorized to respond to the ethereal distress call under Article 7 of the Emergency Protection Protocols. We will engage the Void Reaper force and protect the civilian vessel by any means necessary." Sarah felt a surge of fierce pride. This was why she'd joined the human fleet. This was what separated them from the rest of the Council species. When innocents were threatened, humans didn't debate or form committees or wait for the perfect solution. They acted. "Understood, Admiral. What are your orders?" "Form up on the Defiance," Kane commanded. "Captain Chen, you'll lead the first wave. Hit them fast and hard before they realize what they're facing. The Vengeance will provide fire support as soon as we're in range." The communication channel closed, and Sarah turned to her crew. The bridge had gone quiet, everyone listening to the exchange. She could see the mix of anticipation and fear on their faces. They were about to go into battle against overwhelming odds, but there wasn't a single person who looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. "All hands, battle stations," Sarah announced. "This is not a drill. We are engaging Void Reaper forces to protect ethereal civilians. Remember your training, trust your shipmates, and let's show these raiders why Deathworlders earned that name." The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as her crew prepared for battle. Sarah watched the tactical display as the human ships began to converge on their position. The Retribution appeared first, its sleek destroyer profile cutting through space like a blade. The 2 frigates followed, smaller, but no less deadly. And somewhere behind them, the massive bulk of the Vengeance was burning hard to reach the battle. "Captain," Torres called out, "I'm receiving a transmission from the ethereal ship. Audio only, but they're speaking standard Galactic." "Put it through." A melodious voice filled the bridge, tinged with desperation and fear. "This is Harmony Singer Veltar of the vessel Peaceful Current. We are under attack by unknown vessels. Our shields are failing, and we have no weapons. Please, if anyone can hear this, we have 3,000 souls aboard, including 800 children. We do not wish to die in the void." Sarah's hands tightened on the command rail. The fear in that voice was real and raw. These weren't soldiers or politicians or bureaucrats. They were families, fleeing some disaster, trying to find safety in Council space. And now they were about to be butchered by the galaxy's most ruthless predators. "Helm, maximum burn. Get us to those coordinates now." "Aye, Captain. ETA 14 minutes. Sarah studied the tactical display again. The Reaper ships had closed to within firing range of the ethereal vessel, but they hadn't opened fire yet. That was typical Reaper behavior. They preferred to disable their targets, keeping the cargo intact for the slave markets. It was a small mercy, but it gave them a few precious minutes. Weapons. Status report. Chief Gunner Rodriguez looked up from his console, his scarred face grim but determined. All systems green, Captain. Primary railguns loaded with high-explosive penetrator rounds. Missile tubes 1 through 8 loaded with Hellfire-class warheads. Point defense systems online and ready. Good. When we engage, I want everything you can give me. These aren't pirates or raiders we're dealing with. Reapers don't take prisoners unless they're worth more alive than dead. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sarah watched as the Reaper ships closed the final distance to the ethereal vessel, their black hulls bristling with weapon ports. On the long-range sensors, she could see the colony ship's shields flickering and failing under some kind of jamming field. "Captain," Torres reported, "the ethereals are transmitting again. They're saying goodbye." Sarah's jaw clenched. Not if she could help it. "Retribution is in position," Marcus announced. "Morning Star and Iron Will are 3 minutes behind us." "Signal the Retribution. We go in together. Full attack formation Alpha. Target the largest Reaper vessel first." The next few minutes felt like hours. Sarah could practically feel the desperation of the ethereal crew as their ship's defenses finally collapsed. On the tactical display, she watched as Reaper boarding pods launched from their ships, racing toward the defenseless colony vessel. Then they were there. The Defiance and Retribution dropped out of their high-speed approach simultaneously, their drives screaming as they decelerated hard. The Reaper ships, focused on their prey, never saw them coming until it was too late. "All weapons, open fire!" Sarah commanded. The space between the human ships and the Reaper fleet lit up like a miniature star as railgun rounds and missiles streaked across the void. The lead Reaper vessel, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed even the human cruiser, staggered under the sudden assault. Its shields flared and collapsed, and armor plating began to peel away under the concentrated fire. But the Reapers weren't caught completely off guard. Sarah's tactical display lit up with warnings as the alien ships turned to face this new threat. Their weapons were unlike anything in the Council arsenal, beams of crackling energy that seemed to bend space itself around their targets. "Evasive maneuvers!" Sarah shouted as one of those beams swept across their position. The Defiance shuddered as its port shields absorbed the impact, but held. The Retribution wasn't as lucky. The destroyer took a direct hit amidships, its shields failing in a cascade of sparks. But Captain Torres kept his ship in the fight, returning fire even as his hull began to buckle. "Morning Star and Iron Will are engaging the rear guard," Marcus reported. "They're trying to prevent the Reapers from completing the boarding operation." Sarah nodded grimly. The frigates were fast and deadly, but they were also fragile. Against Reaper dreadnoughts, they were severely outgunned. This entire battle was a desperate gamble, humanity's notorious stubbornness in the face of impossible odds. But sometimes, Sarah reflected as she watched her weapons tear into another Reaper hull, stubbornness was enough. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The space around the ethereal colony ship became a maze of energy beams, missile trails, and debris from damaged vessels. Sarah's crew worked with the deadly efficiency that came from years of training and combat experience. They were Deathworlders, products of a violent planet that had forged them into warriors. This was what they'd been born for. "Vengeance is in range!" Torres shouted over the noise of battle. "Admiral Kane is requesting targeting data." Sarah looked at the tactical display one more time. 3 of the 7 Reaper ships were already disabled or destroyed, but her own fleet was paying a heavy price. The Retribution was listing badly, its engines dark. Morning Star's starboard side was a twisted wreck, and Iron Will was down to emergency power, but they'd bought the time they needed. "Send our targeting data to the Vengeance," Sarah ordered, "and tell Admiral Kane that the outer perimeter is clear for bombardment." What happened next would become the stuff of legend in human naval circles. The UES Vengeance emerged from the darkness like an avenging angel, its massive bulk bristling with enough firepower to flatten a continent. Admiral Kane's voice cut through the communications chatter, cold and final. "Void Reaper vessels, this is Admiral Patricia Kane of the United Earth Fleet. You are ordered to withdraw immediately from Galactic Council space. You have 30 seconds to comply before we open fire." The Reaper response was predictable. Energy beams lanced out toward the human battleship, seeking to cripple it before it could bring its main weapons to bear. But the Vengeance was built to withstand that kind of punishment. Its shields flared but held, and Admiral Kane's reply was swift and devastating. The battleship's main railgun battery spoke with the voice of thunder, launching projectiles the size of small buildings at a significant fraction of light speed. The remaining Reaper vessels simply ceased to exist, torn apart by impacts that released more energy than small nuclear weapons. In the sudden silence that followed, Sarah realized she was holding her breath. The tactical display showed debris fields where the Reaper fleet had been moments before. The ethereal colony ship still hung in space, battered but intact, its crew probably wondering if they'd just been rescued by angels or demons. "Damage report," Sarah said quietly. "Moderate hull damage, port shields at 30%, but all critical systems are operational," Marcus replied. "We lost 14 crew members, Captain, mostly from the engine room when we took that hit." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. 14 good people, dead because she'd chosen to engage an enemy that outgunned them 7-1. The weight of command had never felt heavier, but then Torres spoke up from his station. "Captain, I'm receiving a transmission from the ethereal vessel. They're singing." The bridge speakers filled with the most beautiful sound Sarah had ever heard. Hundreds of voices raised in harmony, a song of gratitude and joy that seemed to resonate in her very bones. It was the sound of 3,000 lives that would see another day, of children who would grow up free instead of in Reaper slave pens. Sarah straightened her shoulders. 14 deaths was a heavy price, but they'd saved 3,000 lives. In her book, that was a trade worth making every time. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "Begin search and rescue operations for any Reaper survivors, and someone get me a channel to that ethereal ship." I think it's time we introduced ourselves properly. As her crew moved to carry out her orders, Sarah looked out at the debris field that had once been a Reaper raiding force. The outcome had never really been in doubt, she realized. Not because the humans were better fighters or had superior weapons, but because they'd been willing to act when others would have hesitated. That was the difference between Deathworlders and the rest of the galaxy. When innocents were threatened, they didn't debate the political ramifications or worry about the cost. They simply did what needed to be done. The Aftermath and Revelations. 3 hours after the battle's end, Captain Sarah Chen found herself in a situation she'd never expected. The conference room aboard the UES Defiance had been hastily converted to accommodate their unusual guests. With lighting adjusted to the softer spectrum preferred by the ethereal species, and gravity reduced to 1/4 standard to account for their delicate crystalline physiology. Harmony singer Veltar stood before her, if stood was the right word for how the ethereals positioned themselves. The being resembled a living sculpture of pure light and crystal, its form shifting between translucent and opaque as emotions played across its consciousness. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in multiple dimensions. "Captain Chen," Veltar began, its melodious voice filled with reverence, "your species has given us a gift beyond measure. We were prepared for the long sleep, for our song to join the eternal chorus. That we remain in the material realm is because of your courage." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She'd faced down enemy fleets and survived boarding actions, but praise from an alien species still felt strange. "We did what anyone would have done," Harmony singer. "We couldn't just leave you to the Reapers." The crystalline being's form flickered with what Sarah had learned was the ethereal equivalent of sadness. I fear that is not entirely accurate, Captain. Your species' response was unique. Before Sarah could ask what that meant, Admiral Kane's voice crackled through the communications system. Captain Chen, please report to the main briefing room. We've got some interesting developments you need to see. 20 minutes later, Sarah sat in the Vengeance's massive briefing room, surrounded by the surviving captains from the human fleet. The holographic display at the center of the table showed a tactical overview of the entire sector, with red markers indicating Reaper activity and blue markers showing human fleet positions. Admiral Kane stood at the head of the table, her expression grim. Ladies and gentlemen, what we learned from our ethereal friends has changed everything we thought we knew about this conflict. She pressed a control, and the display zoomed in on the colony ship's flight path. The peaceful current wasn't just a random target. According to Harmony singer Veltar, they were carrying something the Reapers wanted very badly, something worth risking 7 capital ships in council space. Captain Torres of the Retribution, his left arm in a sling from the battle, leaned forward. What kind of cargo could be that valuable to the Reapers? Information, Kane replied. The Ethereals were fleeing from their home world after it was attacked by a massive Reaper fleet. But before they evacuated, their scientists managed to decode something they found in an ancient ruin, something that reveals the true nature of the Void Reapers. The display changed again, showing what looked like star charts overlaid with strange symbols. Sarah recognized some of the stellar formations, but the symbols were unlike anything she'd ever seen. These are precursor artifacts, Kane continued. The Ethereals discovered them buried beneath their capital city. According to their initial analysis, the precursors were an ancient species that ruled this part of the galaxy millions of years ago. And the Void Reapers aren't some primitive raiding culture. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. They're precursor descendants. More than that, Kane said grimly. They're precursor servants, biological weapons created to harvest resources and eliminate potential threats to their master's return. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Captain Williams of the Morning Star was the first to speak. Admiral, are you saying that everything the Reapers have done, all the worlds they've stripped bare, the billions they've enslaved or killed, it's all been preparation for something larger? Kane nodded. The Ethereals believe the Reapers are preparing this galaxy for the return of their creators. Every resource they harvest, every population they enslave, it's all being stockpiled for when the precursors emerge from whatever deep sleep or distant exile they've been in. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. That's why they've been so relentless. Why they never negotiate or show mercy. They're not really a species at all, they're a force of nature, a galactic harvesting system. And now they know we have this information, Kane added. The survivors from the Reaper fleet transmitted everything back to their command structure before we finished them off. They know the secret is out, and they know exactly who revealed it. The tactical display changed again, showing long-range sensor data from the outer rim. Sarah's blood ran cold as she saw what was highlighted there, dozens of new contacts, all bearing the distinctive energy signatures of Reaper vessels. Not the small raiding fleets they'd fought before, but massive formations that dwarfed anything the Council had ever seen. They're mobilizing, Kane said quietly. Intelligence estimates suggest this is just the beginning. Every Reaper fleet in the galaxy is converging on Council space, and based on the fleet movements we're seeing, they're not coming to raid this time. They're coming to finish the harvest. Captain Morrison from the Iron Will spoke up, his voice hoarse from smoke inhalation during the battle. Admiral, what's the Council's response to this intelligence? Kane's expression grew even more grim. The Council is debating. They're forming committees to verify the ethereal data. They're discussing diplomatic approaches. They're considering whether this intelligence might be some kind of deception or misunderstanding. In other words, they're doing nothing, Sarah said flatly. The Ethereals made this data available to the entire council 3 days ago, Kane confirmed. The response has been disappointing. Most species want more time to study the implications. Some question whether the Ethereals might be mistaken or deliberately misleading us. A few even suggest that we should attempt peaceful contact with the Reapers to discuss the situation diplomatically. Sarah felt her hands clench into fists. It was the same story she'd seen repeated throughout her career. When faced with a clear threat, the galaxy's peaceful species would debate and discuss and form committees until the threat was knocking down their doors. By then, it was always too late. "What about Earth Command?" Captain Torres asked. "What's our government's position?" Kane's smile was sharp and predatory. "President Martinez was very clear in her instructions to me. Humanity will not stand by while the galaxy burns. We've been authorized to take whatever action we deem necessary to protect human interests and the interests of our allies." Sarah felt a surge of fierce pride. Once again, humanity was being forced to stand alone against a threat that the rest of the galaxy refused to acknowledge. But they'd done it before, and they'd do it again. "What are our orders, Admiral?" Kane activated another display, showing human fleet positions throughout the sector. "We're going to do what humans do best, Captain. We're going to fight a war that everyone else is too civilized to acknowledge needs fighting." The display zoomed in on a cluster of star systems near the galactic core. "Long-range sensors have identified what appears to be a major Reaper staging area here. Hundreds of ships, possibly thousands, along with what our analysts believe are processing facilities for the resources they've been harvesting." Sarah studied the tactical data, her mind automatically calculating approach vectors and defensive positions. "That's deep in uncharted space, Admiral. No backup, no supply lines, and definitely no council support." "Exactly the kind of mission humanity specializes in," Kane replied. "We're going to hit them where they don't expect it, disrupt their operations, and send a message that this galaxy isn't defenseless." The other captains exchanged glances. What Kane was proposing was essentially a suicide mission. They'd be outnumbered thousands to one, fighting in enemy territory with no hope of reinforcement or retreat. It was exactly the kind of desperate, impossible situation that had forged humanity's reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous Deathworlders. "When do we leave?" Sarah asked. Kane's smile widened. "Immediately. But first, we're going to solve our numbers problem. The Ethereals aren't the only species that suffered under Reaper attacks. Over the past century, dozens of worlds have been raided or destroyed, the survivors scattered to refugee camps throughout Council space. The display changed to show population centers across human-controlled worlds. We're going to offer them something the Council never has. Not charity, not sympathy, but the chance for revenge. The chance to take the fight to the enemy that destroyed their homes." Sarah felt her heart racing. "You're talking about recruiting an army from refugee populations. Most Council species aren't warriors, Admiral. They don't have the training or the temperament for this kind of fight." "They don't need to be soldiers," Kane replied. "But they know things we don't. Ship configurations, patrol patterns, resource depot locations. And more importantly, they have something we can't replicate. They have motivation. They've lost everything to the Reapers, and they want it back." The tactical display showed projected fleet compositions, mixing human vessels with captured or modified civilian ships from a dozen different species. It was ambitious, audacious, and completely insane. It was also their only chance. Over the next several hours, Sarah watched as Admiral Kane's plan took shape. Messages went out on encrypted channels to human colonies throughout the sector, calling in favors and activating sleeper cells that had been in place for decades. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Captain Morrison was the first to report in. "Admiral, I've got 47 volunteers from the Zephyrian refugees on New Tokyo. They're civilian engineers, but they know Reaper ship designs better than our own intelligence analysts." Captain Torres followed up minutes later. The crystalline survivors from the Beta Centauri massacre want in. 53 individuals willing to serve as technical specialists. They're also offering to modify our weapons with some kind of harmonic disruptor technology. The reports kept coming. Survivors from a dozen species, each bringing their own skills and knowledge to the growing alliance. Some offered technical expertise, others provided intelligence on Reaper operations. A few brought weapons or equipment salvaged from their destroyed worlds. But it was the volunteers from species Sarah had never heard of that surprised her the most. Refugees who had been hiding in the Outer Rim territories for decades, surviving through guerrilla warfare against Reaper raiders. They came forward now, offering their experience and their lives for a chance to strike back. "Admiral," Sarah said during a brief lull in the planning, "this isn't going to be a military operation. It's going to be a rebellion." Kane nodded grimly. The Council's peaceful approach has failed for over a century. Maybe it's time to try something different. The next day brought even more surprises. A delegation from the ethereal colony ship requested permission to join the human fleet, despite their species' pacifist nature. Harmony singer Veltar explained their decision with the musical tones that passed for speech among their kind. "We have seen what happens to those who trust in peace alone," Veltar sang. "Our homeworld is ash, our people scattered. We cannot fight as you fight, but we can serve in other ways. Our ships are swift, our sensors precise. We offer ourselves as scouts and messengers." Sarah found herself moved by the ethereal's words. To abandon their core beliefs, even temporarily, showed a level of commitment that she hadn't expected from the crystalline beings. But the biggest surprise came from an unexpected source. A heavily encrypted transmission arrived from deep in Council space, its origin point traced to the Galactic Council chambers themselves. The message was brief and to the point. "Admiral Kane, this is Councillor Thex of the Altarian Empire. While I cannot officially endorse your mission, I wanted you to know that certain members of the Council understand the true nature of the threat we face. You will find that some of our peaceful species have maintained military capabilities that they do not advertise. Watch for the silver ships. They will find you when the time is right." Kane stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it from the ship's records. "Well, Captain Chen," she said finally, "it appears we won't be quite as alone as we thought." Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of hope and apprehension. The plan was coming together, but they were still facing impossible odds. Thousands of Reaper vessels, armed with weapons that could crack planets. Even with their growing alliance, it would take a miracle to succeed. But as she looked around the briefing room at the faces of her fellow captains, Sarah realized that miracles were something humanity specialized in. They were Deathworlders, products of a violent world that had taught them to never give up, never surrender, and never back down from a fight that needed fighting. The Reapers thought they were harvesting a defenseless galaxy. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. "All right, ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Kane said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never lost a battle that mattered. "Let's go start a war." As the meeting broke up and the captains returned to their ships, Sarah couldn't help but smile. The outcome of this conflict had been decided the moment humanity chose to answer that ethereal distress call. Not because they were stronger or smarter or better equipped than their enemies, but because when innocent lives were threatened, Deathworlders didn't debate the political ramifications. They simply did what needed to be done, and this time, they weren't doing it alone. The final stand. The massive Reaper processing facility hung in space like a metallic cancer, its black hull stretching for hundreds of kilometers in all directions. Captain Sarah Chen studied the tactical display from the bridge of the UES Defiance. Her enhanced fleet now numbering over 300 vessels from 47 different species. What had started as a human rescue mission had become the largest military alliance in galactic history. Target analysis complete, Captain, reported Lieutenant Torres. The facility is definitely active. We're detecting massive energy signatures consistent with matter conversion processes. They're turning entire asteroids into raw materials. Sarah nodded grimly. The journey to reach this hidden Reaper stronghold had taken 2 weeks, following intelligence provided by crystalline refugees who had escaped from similar facilities. What they'd found exceeded their worst fears. The Reapers weren't just harvesting resources, they were systematically converting entire star systems into construction materials for something massive. "Any sign of the defense fleet?" she asked. "Long-range sensors show approximately 2,000 Reaper vessels in defensive positions around the facility, multiple Dreadnought-class ships, at least 50 of the largest configuration we've encountered." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Even with their expanded fleet, they were still outnumbered 6-1. But they'd come too far to turn back now. The intelligence they'd gathered over the past 2 weeks painted a picture of galactic catastrophe. The Reapers weren't preparing for their master's return. They were actively constructing something that would herald the end of organic life in this galaxy. "Signal from Admiral Kane," Marcus reported from his position. "All fleet commanders are to report to the Vengeance for final briefing in 30 minutes. An hour later, Sarah found herself in the Vengeance's expanded briefing room, now modified to accommodate representatives from dozens of different species. Harmony Singer Veltar stood beside her, its crystalline form pulsing with nervous energy. Across the room, she could see Captain Zexhai of the Reptilian Liberation Front, his scarred scales telling the story of decades of guerrilla warfare against Reaper raiders. Admiral Kane stood at the center of the room, her expression grim but determined. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings," she began, "our reconnaissance has confirmed what we feared. The Reapers aren't just processing resources, they're building something." The holographic display activated, showing detailed scans of the processing facility. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she saw what their sensors had revealed. Deep within the facility's core, something massive was taking shape. It looked like a ship, but on a scale that defied comprehension. "Preliminary analysis suggests this vessel is over 1,000 kilometers long," Kane continued. "Our precursor specialists believe it's some kind of arc ship, designed to carry an enormous population across intergalactic distances. If our theory is correct, the Reapers are preparing to bring their masters home from wherever they've been waiting." A collective murmur ran through the assembled commanders. Captain Thane of the Aquatic Defense Corps raised a webbed hand. "Admiral, what kind of population are we talking about?" Kane's expression grew even more grim. "Conservative estimates suggest capacity for over 1 billion individuals. If this ship is completed and launches, we're not just facing the return of the precursors. We're facing a colonization fleet that could overwhelm the entire galaxy within a matter of years." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized what they were really looking at. This wasn't just a military target. It was the key to preventing galactic extinction. "Our mission objective is clear," Kane continued. "We need to destroy that facility and the ship it's building. But our tactical situation is challenging. 2,000 Reaper vessels in defensive positions with more arriving every hour. Once we begin our attack, there will be no retreat. We either succeed here or the galaxy falls." Captain Morrison from the Iron Will spoke up. "Admiral, what about Council support? Have they finally realized the magnitude of this threat?" Kane's smile was bitter. "The Council voted yesterday to send a diplomatic mission to attempt negotiations with the Reapers. They should arrive here in approximately 6 months, assuming they can find volunteers brave enough to undertake such a pointless gesture." Sarah shook her head in disgust. Even faced with evidence of an existential threat, the Council's response was to talk. It was exactly the kind of thinking that had allowed the Reapers to operate unopposed for over a century. "However," Kane continued, We have received some unexpected support. Captain Chen, please tell the group about our new allies. Sarah stood, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. 3 days ago, we made contact with what Counselor Thex called the Silver Ships. They turned out to be vessels from species that officially maintain pacifist policies, but secretly maintain military forces for exactly this kind of situation. She activated her personal display, showing the sleek silver vessels that had rendezvoused with their fleet. The meditation masters of the Inner Spiral contributed 12 heavy cruisers equipped with consciousness disruption weapons. The Peaceful Gardeners provided 30 frigates armed with biological warfare systems. Even the Harmony Collective sent 6 dreadnoughts disguised as civilian transports. A ripple of surprise ran through the room. These were species known throughout the galaxy for their commitment to non-violence, yet here they were contributing warships to a human-led military operation. It seems, Kane added with grim satisfaction, that when faced with extinction, even the most peaceful species recognize the necessity of violence. Our combined fleet now numbers over 600 vessels, with representatives from 93 different species. This is no longer a human operation. This is a galactic rebellion. The briefing continued for another hour, covering tactical plans, communication protocols, and fallback positions. But Sarah found her attention drifting to the faces around her. Beings from across the galaxy, united not by politics or diplomacy, but by simple survival instinct. This was what the Council should have been, she realized. Not a debating society, but an alliance of free peoples willing to fight for their continued existence. As the meeting broke up, Harmony singer Veltar approached her. Captain Chen, the ethereal sang, I wanted to express my gratitude once more. When we sent that distress call, we never imagined it would lead to this moment. Sarah smiled at the crystalline being. Sometimes the right thing to do is also the necessary thing to do. Your people's courage in preserving that precursor data gave us the knowledge we needed to find this place. And your people's courage in answering our call gave us hope when we thought all was lost. Veltar replied, Whatever happens in the coming battle, the galaxy will remember that when darkness threatened to consume all life, the Deathworlders stood firm. 6 hours later, Sarah stood on the bridge of the Defiance as the combined fleet approached the Reaper stronghold. The tactical display showed their forces arranged in a complex formation designed to maximize their limited advantages. Human and allied warships formed the spearhead, their heavy weapons ready to punch through Reaper defenses. The lighter vessels from refugee species would provide support and harassment, using their intimate knowledge of Reaper tactics to exploit weaknesses. Enemy fleet is responding, Torres reported. They're moving to intercept us in standard defensive formation. Estimated contact in 15 minutes. Sarah felt the familiar pre-battle calm settle over her. This was it. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd sacrificed for, came down to the next few hours. Either they would destroy the facility and prevent the precursor return, or they would die trying. There was no middle ground, no room for compromise. Signal the fleet, she ordered. All ships prepare to engage. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every species, every world, every life in this galaxy. Make them count. The next few minutes passed in tense silence as the two fleets closed the distance. Sarah could see individual Reaper vessels on the display now, their black hulls bristling with weapons. She'd fought them before, but never on this scale. The sight was both terrifying and oddly inspiring. Humanity and its allies were about to take on the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen. Contact in 30 seconds, Marcus announced. All weapons ready, shields at maximum. Sarah gripped the command rail and took a deep breath. All ships, this is Captain Chen. Remember what we're fighting for. Remember why we're here. And show these ancient parasites what happens when they threaten free peoples. Then the battle was joined. Space erupted into chaos as 600 Allied vessels clashed with 2,000 Reaper ships. The void filled with energy beams, missile trails, and the brilliant flashes of exploding vessels. Sarah watched the tactical display with a mixture of pride and horror as her allies threw themselves into battle with desperate courage. The Meditation Master's consciousness disruption weapons proved devastatingly effective, causing entire Reaper formations to lose cohesion as their neural networks were scrambled. The peaceful gardener's biological weapons ate through Reaper armor like acid, creating massive hull breaches that vented atmosphere and crew into space. But the Reapers fought back with vicious efficiency. Their energy weapons carved through Allied shields like paper, and their massive dreadnoughts shrugged off hits that would have crippled lesser vessels. Within the first hour of battle, Sarah's force had lost over 100 ships. "Defiance! This is Admiral Kane," the communication system crackled. "We're breaking through their outer perimeter, but we're taking heavy casualties. How are you holding up?" Sarah glanced at her damage display. The Defiance had taken multiple hits. Her port shields were down to 20%, and they'd lost main engine power twice. But her ship was still fighting, and that was what mattered. "Still in the fight, Admiral. What's our status on the facility?" "We've got a clear shot at the primary target," Kane replied. "But their inner defenses are stronger than we anticipated. I'm going to need every ship we can spare for the final assault." Sarah looked at the tactical display one more time. The battle was far from over, but they were making progress. Slowly, steadily, the combined fleet was grinding through Reaper defenses. It was costing them dearly, but they were winning. "All ships! This is Admiral Kane," the fleet commander's voice rang out across all channels. "Final assault begins now. Target the facility's reactor core. If we can destroy their power source, the entire complex will go down." What followed was the most intense hour of combat Sarah had ever experienced. The surviving Allied vessels formed up for one last, desperate charge at the processing facility, fighting through layers of defensive positions. Reaper ships threw themselves at the attackers with suicidal fury, but nothing could stop the momentum of beings fighting for their very survival. Sarah watched in amazement as Harmony Singer Veltar's ship, a graceful, ethereal vessel never designed for combat, rammed straight through a Reaper destroyer to clear a path for the human battleships. The crystalline being's sacrifice opened a corridor that allowed Admiral Kane's dreadnoughts to reach firing range of the facility's core. The Vengeance's main guns spoke with the voice of human determination, launching projectiles that hit with the force of nuclear weapons. Other Allied ships added their fire, pouring everything they had into the massive structure. For a moment, Sarah thought it wouldn't be enough. The facility's shields held, its structure intact. Then secondary explosions began to ripple through the complex. The precursor ship under construction started to break apart as its supporting infrastructure failed. Chain reactions spread through the facility's reactor core, building to a crescendo that would make this the most spectacular explosion in galactic history. "All ships withdraw immediately," Kane's voice cut through the chaos. "Core breach in progress. Get clear of the blast radius." Sarah grabbed the communication system. "All vessels emergency burn. Maximum acceleration away from the facility. Move, move, move." The surviving ships of the Allied fleet turned and ran, their engines screaming as they tried to reach minimum safe distance. Behind them, the Reaper processing facility began to come apart in slow motion, its massive structure buckling under the force of contained stellar fire being released all at once. Sarah watched the tactical display as the explosion expanded, consuming everything in its path. Reaper ships that had been pursuing the retreating fleet simply vanished, vaporized by energies that turned the local space into a miniature star. When the light finally faded, there was nothing left but cooling plasma and debris. "Status report," Sarah called out as her bridge crew recovered from the shock. "Facility destroyed," Torres reported, his voice filled with awe. Complete structural collapse. No energy signatures, no survivors. It's gone, Captain. All of it. Sarah sank back in her command chair, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over her. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, they'd destroyed the Reaper stronghold and prevented the completion of the precursor Ark ship, but the cost had been enormous. "Fleet status?" she asked quietly. Marcus consulted his displays, his face grim. "We lost over 400 ships, Captain. Casualty estimates are still coming in, but we're looking at close to 200,000 dead or missing." Sarah closed her eyes. 200,000 beings who would never see their homes again, who had given their lives to prevent galactic extinction. The weight of their sacrifice would stay with her forever. But they had won. The immediate threat was over, and the galaxy had time to prepare for whatever came next. "Captain," Torres called out, "I'm receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. News of our victory is spreading. The Council is requesting immediate reports. Several species are offering military support for future operations." Sarah smiled tiredly. Now that the fighting was over, everyone wanted to be part of the victory. It was typical political behavior, but she found she didn't care anymore. What mattered was that they'd proven something important. When faced with an existential threat, free peoples could unite and fight back. "Signal Admiral Kane," she ordered. "Tell her the Defiance is ready for new orders." As her crew worked to repair battle damage and tend to the wounded, Sarah reflected on how this had all started. A simple distress call from an ethereal colony ship. A routine rescue mission that had become the largest military operation in galactic history. The outcome had never really been in doubt, she realized. Not because the Alliance had superior numbers or better weapons, but because they'd been fighting for something the Reapers couldn't understand. They'd been fighting for the right to exist, for the freedom to live and love and build something better. That was the difference between organic life and the ancient machines that served extinction. Organic beings didn't just survive, they thrived. They created, they adapted, they found ways to overcome any obstacle. And when threatened, they stood together. The Reapers had been counting on a divided, defenseless galaxy. Instead, they'd found something they couldn't harvest or enslave or destroy. They'd found hope. And hope, Sarah knew, was the one thing in the universe that could never be defeated. Across the galaxy, the news of humanity's victory spread like wildfire. The Reaper threat wasn't completely eliminated, but their main stronghold was gone, and their plans for precursor return had been shattered. For the first time in over a century, the galaxy's free peoples had something they'd almost forgotten how to feel. They had hope for the future, and it had all started with a Deathworlder fleet answering an alien SOS, doing what Deathworlders did best, the right thing, regardless of the cost. The outcome had been decided the moment Captain Sarah Chen chose to act instead of wait for orders. Because that's what humans did when innocent lives were threatened. They answered the call.